Ezekiel 7, verse 5. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, by Hashem Yahushai, and evil, and only evil, behold, is come. An end is come, the end is come. It watcheth for thee, behold, it is come. The morning is come unto thee, O thou that dwellest in the land. The time is come, the day of trouble is near, and not the sounding again of the mountains. First and foremost, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Bahashem, Rachakwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of Great Millstone, who rule very well, very beautifully. Double salutations be unto the Akim, out here pushing this gospel in truth and in sincerity, to the best of their ability, given to them by Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai. Peace, blessings, and salutations be unto the elect scattered abroad. May the election of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Lord willing, fall upon your houses. This is the Brother Quanawath, come back at you, Lord will, with edifying lesson through spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, Lord will. It is edifying, Lord will. It is straight to the point. And things are about to get really bad, man. You know, just with this whole, situation over there in Iran. And, for those that have been on their watch, on their watchtower, man, and paying attention to what's going on, right? America ultimately just bombed, a major military base over there in, near the Strait of Hormuz. It was a 5,000 pound and multiple 5,000 pound bunker busters, over there, as well as, I was watching, one of the Blood Brothers, GMS Gabar, a war, and he was doing a lesson, just based off of something that, his coworker, had said, about the gas prices going up, and he was asking ChatGPT, roughly about how many, cargo ships and whatnot are waiting over there, to pass through, right, to ultimately deliver their, inside the actual, the strait, right, waiting, right, to pass through in order to, bring products to wherever they need to go. And it's saying roughly about 3,200 different cargo ships, right, are waiting, right, inside the Strait of Hormuz, right, waiting to pass through. But see, Iran, right, ultimately has, it blocked off, right? Nobody can come in, nobody can go out except for, those who are ultimately doing business with, Iran, right? I think it was about 89, actual, tankers were able to, or not just tankers, but 15 of those 89 were oil tankers, and a lot of those were going to China. So they are allowing some, and a very, very, very small percentage, to actually pass through, but again, none of those that pass through are for America, so that right there is going to cause prices to skyrocket, right? We're already seeing gas prices, jumping up here in America. Soon, very soon, we're going to see prices across the board, from clothing to, alcohol to, electronics, really to everything is going to skyrocket, right? Again, we're already seeing prices, go up, and typically, prices across the board tend to go up when gas prices go up, man, right? Because there's a lot of petroleum, or there's a lot of products, right, that ultimately use, petroleum or obviously transportation and whatnot, right, using that oil, that gas, prices across the board are going to go up, and that's something that we ultimately need to be mindful of, right? And now, right, as you're seeing right here, this is on the Washington Post, right? It says Trump's cancellation of licenses for immigrant truckers takes effect, right? And that started, Monday, you got Trump ultimately trying to, and they've been, since this whole crackdown on, the migrants, there's been, certain moves, right, that have ultimately been implemented. Like, you have this English proficiency test, right, that ultimately was, enacted, right, and given to a lot of these migrants, and that took around 6 to 7 thousand migrants, out of the trucking industry, you know, and then as well as they were cracking down on California issuing license, and ultimately revoking some of those license, and that took around 17,000, 16 to 17,000 truckers, just in California off the roads, man. Which some of the largest ports, in America are in California. You know, and really all of this, right, is leading to, a famine, is leading to prices going up, and these average everyday people, crashing out, because that's what we're looking down the barrel of, man. We're looking down the barrel of Jacob's trouble, the hour of temptation, man, in which things are going to get really bad, and what is Esau going to do, right? Because we understand that, the scriptures say, when adversity come upon thee, thou shalt find him there first. Esau is the one that is creating, this, famine, if you will, right? By going and attacking Iran, forcing Iran to close the strait, and then coming up and canceling licenses, right? This is all by design, but nonetheless, it's going to lead to, further turmoil. It's going to lead to, again, right, people crashing out, not being able to buy food, not being able, because prices are going up, right? Which we're going to get into. Hyperinflation, right? For those that don't know, hyperinflation is when prices extremely skyrocket. Yeah, I had somebody at the door, but nonetheless, right? Hyperinflation is when prices extremely skyrocket, and again, that's prophesied, ultimately to happen, to take place, But I want to get into this article, real quick. It's not very long, but it says Trump's cancellation of licenses for immigrant truckers takes effect. Around 200,000 people will start losing commercial license under a federal rule that takes effect Monday, a move that can mean higher prices for consumers. And that's a lot, right? 200,000 immigrant truckers, right? And when you think about, the trucking industry, right? It's a main artery, right, as far as products being moved, here in America, man. If not majority, and I think it might even give you some of those numbers, but we'll ultimately read and get into it, right? It says some 200,000 immigrant truckers will begin to lose their commercial driver's license as they expire under a new Trump administration rule that takes effect Monday, right? The Transportation Department's rule will weigh on the beleaguered trucking industry. Slovakia says, which is critical to transporting goods across America at a time when energy costs are surging due to the war in Iran, right? So this is coming on the back of this war, right? Which is only going to make things worse, right? It says the rule bars immigrants who are asylum seekers, refugees, or recipients of deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, from obtaining commercial driver's license, and it's part of the Trump administration's widening campaign against immigrant truck drivers following several high-profile accidents last summer. It says those with valid commercial driver's license will lose their driving privileges as their licenses expire not immediately. So this is something that we're going to see ultimately start to trickle in, as the days, weeks, months, go by, right? Really, the next weeks, right, are ultimately going to be telling, as far as how the economy is going to be affected, right, from these different events, right? Because again, mind you, this is coming on the back of the war that's already 2-3 weeks in, and time is flying, man, right? And then it gives you, ultimately this guy right here, his statement, right? He's ultimately, a law-abiding, never, never, according to him, right, never broke the law, and he's going to be affected, right? But I want to drop down a little bit past his, his testimony. It says about 200,000 immigrants in the United States hold about 5% of all commercial driver license, according to Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And you think, 5%, that's not a lot, out of, out of 100%, 5%, right? So you times 5% times 20, we're talking, over a million truckers, 20 times, 200,000 times 20, or 2 million or 20 million truckers, I know my math's off, way off, I'm just throwing numbers out there, but still, 200,000 to, the complete number isn't a lot, but nonetheless, the less truckers that are on the roads, the less, products, food, water, so on and so forth get transferred, man, right? Which means it's going to take longer, right? Which means it's going to cost more money because it's going to be sitting in the warehouses, right? Longer, right? Or it's going to be sitting at the cargo, what are those? I can't even think of the freaking name, man. The ports. Yeah, the cargo ports. The what you could be sitting at the cargo ports longer, man. Which mean especially when it comes to food or whatnot, goods, then those things are gonna be, they're gonna have they're gonna get to the stores late, which means they might be good for a day or two when they're on the shelves, which means they got to take them off the shelves, which means people are gonna be companies are gonna be losing money, which means more. Again, this is domino effect, right? You have to, ultimately, look at how these things are going to be affecting, the average American in the near future. So this is a huge, deal, right? 200,000 truckers, right, are going to lose their licenses, which means you're going to start to see more truckers being pulled over, and or being arrested, or, ICE or whatnot coming and grabbing it. I mean, it's going to be, this is going to be bad, man. We're entering into some very, very bad times, right, that are ahead. As we read in Matthew 24 and verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows, man. It says truckers are the main way that goods from food to heavy machinery to hazardous material are transported within the United States, moving more than 70% of the nation's freight, right, according to a trade group. With long hours, low pay, dangerous road conditions, and extended periods away from home, trucking is plagued by high turnover rates, man. So you don't really get a lot of people that stay, and do these, jobs, right? And from what I know, right, they ultimately, a lot of companies say, hey, in order for you to do local, right, you got to do at least a year to 2 years, over the road, which means you're going to be gone for 2-3 weeks, then you're going to be home for a week, gone for 2-3 weeks, then you're going to be home for a week, and that's just ultimately how it goes, man, but with, migrant truckers ultimately, being being the main target, right, you're going to see a lot less truckers, man, which means prices are going to go high. It says, as Americans have left the industry, immigrants have moved in amid worsening working conditions and deregulation. Because again, when you go over to these different countries, they're you got the conditions in these different shops and whatnot, and again they get low pay and whatnot. Then they come over to America, they're getting damn near the same pay as Americans, and it's better working conditions than what they were used to. Hey, they're all for it. Versus Americans, they're if it because these average Americans today, man, they're fucking proud, man. They believe that they are, they have to sit on a pedestal and whatnot, So these migrants are more than happy to take these positions, Whereas Americans think that conditions are terrible, they think that the conditions are great, So of course, it says under the rule announced on February 11th, immigrants with a variety of temporary protections would no longer be able to obtain commercial driver's license regardless of whether they're authorized to work in the United States. For far too long, America has allowed dangerous foreign drivers to abuse our truck licensing system, wreaking havoc on our roadways, Transportation Secretary Sean P. Duffy said in a statement announcing the rule last month. You know, so ultimately, and we can, you know, call it there, right? Because ultimately, the main point, right, is the fact that they're ultimately going to be, removing truckers, right, off the roads. And how is this going to affect the everyday Americans? It's going to cause prices to skyrocket, which means your pockets are going to be hit, right? And we're in a time where, these people are already on the verge of major crash out, man. Because the price is going up, because of the cost of living, going up, right? Especially with Trump having these tariffs on these 10% tariffs across the board on all nations, right? Minimum 10%, tariff across the board, right? That's causing, I've done lessons on, as well as elder apostles on down, have all done lessons on it, right? That causes the average income or the average household, right, to have to pay an extra $2,100 to $2,400, annually, for the cost of living, you know. And with this war, and with these truckers being taken off, the roads, this is only going to spell disaster, you know. Hence the reason why I started with Ezekiel the 7th chapter, right? That time of trouble is near, you know, and it's very near, man. So let me grab this, because again, I wanted to touch on this famine portion of it, man, because this is gonna cause food prices, right? People can live, with because I know my my worldly brother, right, in the world, I grew up with, right. He's got fucking clothes out the fucking wazoo, man. He's got shoes, clothes, he's got there's the online streaming gaming bullshit, whatnot. So these people, they have the stuff that these people just get bored easily, right? So they have the clothes, they have the electronics, they have all this stuff, man. So they can do without that for a little while, or without getting an upgrade, immediately as soon as it comes out. But these people can sort of deal with that, especially here in America, right? To a certain degree, right? For the most part, no, not compared to, outside of America, these different countries where these people don't have all this stuff. Yes, they can deal with, not having TV. They can deal with, not having certain, American so-called luxuries and whatnot, right? But here in America, they can only get pushed so far, right? Let the people's food supply be, or the cost of their food, you know, go up just $1 or two. These people got a fucking problem, or let them not be able to, go get some chicken at fucking, Walmart or Popeyes or whatnot. They're gonna fucking throw a fucking fit. Right. Well, how much more when the prices skyrocket so much that no matter how many hours that they work at work, no matter how many jobs that they have, they're not gonna be able to pay for food. And that's the time that we're coming into, man. But I want to grab this, which is an account, right? Ecclesiastes 1:9. There's no new thing under the sun. That which hath been is that which shall be, right? And we're looking at a situation that had been, right? It already happened in history, right? And this is what's going to happen again here in America here soon, right? To 2 Kings 6, in the NLT, it says Ben-Hadad besieges Samaria, right? It says sometime later, however, King Ben-Hadad of Aram mustered his entire army and besieged Samaria. Now I want to go into that word besiege. I got it right here pulled up on the online etymology, right? It says besiege, right? Lay siege. When you break it down, it says be, meaning what? About, right? Around, thoroughly, right? And then siege, right? Seat, right? To basically sit around, right? To seat, right? Sit around, chair, stool, right? When you read down a little bit, it says the military sense, right? Let's see if we can highlight it. No, we can't. It says the military sense. It says the stationing of an attacking force before or around a fortified place. The act of process of besieging a city or castle, right? So basically sitting around, and when a military ultimately goes up to a city and besieges it, what do? They surround it and they cut off all the resources. They cut off all, like when you go into the ancient times, right? You had those carts that, the cows and whatnot that people would pull, and people would bring in their food and whatnot to sell it in the market and so on and so forth. And what are they doing? They're stopping all that. They're stopping all that. They're taking it, right? Taking that food and whatnot, taking it for themselves, for their army, for their military. They're taking everything, right? All the gold that might be coming in, all the resources that might be coming in. They're taking all of it, right? They're stopping it from being transported. And this is exactly what we're seeing happen. You know, ultimately, war is being waged on you American people, man. You know, and you people don't see it. But see again, you people are gonna be fucked when that shit happens. When the shit hits the fan, you know, and it's not gonna happen overnight, right? It's gonna happen, over time, and then one day you're gonna wake up and the prices are gonna be fucking goddamn, $20 or $30 for one loaf of bread that now costs $2-3. You know, it says as a result, there was a great famine in the city, right? A great famine, right? Which is what's coming. It says the siege lasted so long that a donkey's head, right? When you look at a donkey's head, it don't got a lot of meat. Maybe the cheeks, the tongue, and that's about it. There's not a lot of meat, edible meat on a donkey, right? And even then, it's an unclean animal. We're not allowed to eat, donkeys, man. But nonetheless, that's what was left. That's what they had, right? It says the siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 pieces of silver. Now I think, silver right now. Matter of fact, let me pull it up. Give me one. All right, I looked up the ounce of silver as of today, right? It says as of March 18, 2026, the live spot price of silver is trading around $76 to $77 per ounce, right? Which when you times that, let's grab this real quick. Let's grab a calculator, right? Let's grab 77 times 80. 6,160. That's just in today, at today's price, right? I remember it was at $30 at one point, right? So 30, right, times 80, right? That's still $2,400. That's a lot of fucking money, right? So anywhere from, depending on time frame or what the cost of, the value of that silver was at that time, it could be anywhere from $2,400 to roughly $7,000, for a fucking donkey's head, and that's a fucking shit ton of money, man. It says, as a result, there was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 pieces of silver, and a cup of dove's dung, meaning shit, sold for 5 pieces of silver. Let's go and make sure that word dung, right? Which, if you don't know, go ahead and look it up anyways. But it ultimately mean, right, poop, right? It says dove's dung, right? And then you read down, probably a kind of vegetable excrement, excrement of doves, poop, dove's dung, sparrow's dung, right? Poop. That's what it is, right? So for 5 pieces of silver, right, which 5 times, let's just do the math on it, right? 5 times, let's say 30, right? That's still 150, right, for poop, right? And let's say at the regular price, sorry, 77 times 5, 385. So anywhere from 150 to almost $400, for just a cup of bird excrement, man. That's a lot of money. See, again, but that's hyperinflation, And again, this is what ultimately is going to, take place, in the very near future. Revelation 6 and verse 5, it said, when the Lamb broke the third seal, I heard the third living being say, "Come." I looked up and saw a black horse, and its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand, right? It says, and I heard a voice from among the 4 living beings, a loaf of wheat bread. Matter of fact, let's go back to a pair of scales, right? Pair of balances is what it was, right? Pair of balances. It says what? It says zygos, right? Strong's G 2218, zygos, right? Um, it says yoke that is put on draught cattle, right? It says use, right? Because ultimately what they're doing, is ultimately, making it to where you can't get the food, right? Making it hard, for you to get the food, man. You know, it says a yoke that is put on draught cattle. It says metaphor used of any burden or bondage. Right, right, right. So it says verse 6. It says, I heard a voice from among the four beings saying, a loaf of wheat bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay, and don't waste the olive oil and the wine. And the olive oil and the wine are symbolic for this truth, But it says what? A loaf of wheat bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay. Now the average, I think it was like 12.50 or something for, the federal wage, right? Most people working 8 hours a day, so $100 for a loaf of bread, right? $100 for the loaf of bread. Now you get, let's say the average pay in America is $20, or I think it was 22 something, times 8, 176. So anywhere from, $100 to $300, right, for a loaf of bread. That's hyperinflation, and this is a future prophecy, right? This is what is coming, right? You can't deny it. You can't run away from it, right? This is prophecy, man. Right? Yahweh Shem Shai, as the elder, I think it's the elder apostle Remlab says, right? Everything is turning to the tune of prophecy. It could be elder apostle Tahar, but I'm pretty sure I've heard elder apostle Remlab ultimately say that, man. Multiple times. Everything is turning to the tune of prophecy, and prophecy is going to be fulfilled, as it is being fulfilled now, and again, this prophecy is coming, right? You people are looking down the barrel of some very evil times, man, So let me grab this and we'll ultimately close out. This is Ephesians 5 and verse 15. It says, see then that you walk circumspectly, right? Looking around, paying attention, It says, not as fools, but as wise, right? The scriptures say a prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. And how are you going to hide yourself, right? In these scriptures, in the words of Yahweh Shemel Shai, hence the reason why, right, we're constantly telling y'all every single day, get this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding before it's too late. Proverbs the 4th chapter, verse 5-7, get wisdom, get understanding. It says, redeeming the time because the days are evil. We are in some evil times now. How much more, as the days go on, because it's only going to get worse, right? 2 Ezra the 14th chapter, the 16th verse, right? Greater evils than those which thou hast seen happen shall happen hereafter. Roughly paraphrasing, man. So get right with Yahweh Shem Shai before it's too late, right? It says, wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is. And the will of the Lord is that prophecy be fulfilled. That the elect would ultimately listen and take heed and repent in these times, right? And the rest, right, who ultimately will not take heed of the nation of Israel will ultimately perish, And by what means or what, what way you perish, hey, that's ultimately up to the Lord, man. But you don't want to be caught in the times of famine, man. You do not want to be caught in the times of famine. I think it was King David said that, it's better to, to die than to be stricken with hunger. Roughly paraphrasing, man. So, hey, we in these times, man, shit's only going to get worse. Just continue to, hey, those who truly believe and trust in Yahweh Shemel Shai, continue to watch, continue to pray, Continue to keep the faith to the best of your ability, man. We're almost out of here. So with that, Lord will is edifying, Lord will straight to the point. I'm going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rechak Wadash, that belongs to the elder apostles, the elder bishops, the elders of the great millstone. Till next time, I say shalom.